She was told she couldn't run a rescue, that dispatchers were glorified phone operators, that her job was to relay information, not make decisions. They said it to her face. They put it in writing. They made sure she knew her place. Then the radios died. All of them. At once, deep inside a burning mountain of twisted steel and collapsed concrete, 14 firefighters were cut off from the world. No GPS, no signal, no way out, except one, her voice. And the 3 years she spent doing something nobody in that building knew about. Something she'd been trying to forget. Something that was about to save every single life down in that darkness. This is the story of Elena Vasquez, the dispatcher they said couldn't run a rescue, the woman who ran 14 of them, simultaneously, in the dark. The morning of March the 8th started the way most mornings at Station 42's Emergency Coordination Center started, coffee going cold on somebody's desk, a radio crackling with routine traffic from units across the county, the low hum of fluorescent lights that nobody ever fixed because nobody ever got around to it. Elena Vasquez was at her console by 6:45, 15 minutes before her shift technically started, the way she always was. She had her headset on, her logs open, her frequency chart memorized the way other people memorize their own phone numbers. She was 31 years old, 5'4", brown hair pulled back tight, no jewelry, no unnecessary accessories on the job. She had worked as a communications dispatcher for the Harlow County Fire and Emergency Services for 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. She knew this because she had been counting, not out of sentiment, out of something else entirely, something she kept locked behind her eyes whenever Captain Bryce Donnelly walked past her console without looking at her. Donnelly ran the coordination center, not officially. His official title was Deputy Director of Field Operations, which meant that technically he and Elena's supervisor, Director Anita Flores, were peers. But Donnelly had a way of filling a room that Flores never quite matched, and over time, the culture of the center had arranged itself around him the way furniture arranges itself around the biggest piece in a room. He was tall, loud, confident in the way that people are confident when they have never once been seriously wrong about anything important. He had come up through the ranks as a field commander, led 3 major incident responses in the previous decade, and received 2 commendations from the state fire marshal's office. He was, by any reasonable measure, extremely good at his job. He was also deeply, completely, and unshakably certain that Elena Vasquez was not good at hers. It had started small, a comment in a debrief 6 months after she joined, something about how dispatchers tended to over-communicate in the field and clutter frequency bandwidth during active scenes. She had taken notes, adjusted her protocols. The comments didn't stop. They evolved, became more specific. In one review he had written, and she had the document saved on her personal drive at home, that Vasquez demonstrates strong technical proficiency, but lacks the operational instinct necessary for high-complexity incident management. She had read that sentence approximately 200 times. She had never once responded to it out loud. That morning, March the 8th, Donnelly arrived at 7:15 with a coffee in one hand and a tablet in the other, and walked past her console the way he always did. But today, he stopped, which he almost never did. He stopped because Lieutenant Marcus Webb was standing near Elena's station, leaning over to ask her something about a frequency reassignment for Engine 12, and Donnelly apparently felt the conversation needed a third perspective. "You should loop in Miller on anything frequency-related for the industrial district," Donnelly said, not to Webb specifically, just into the air between them. "Elena handles the routine traffic fine, but anything that might escalate to a multi-unit response, you want someone with incident command background in the loop." Webb looked mildly uncomfortable. Elena kept her eyes on her console. "The Harlow Industrial Complex inspection is this afternoon," she said without turning around. "Engine 12, Engine 7, Ladder 3, and Rescue 2 are all cycling through. I've already pre-cleared the backup frequencies and flagged the structural assessment report from the county engineer's office, the one noting the compromised mezzanine supports in Building C." A pause. "Good," Donnelly said. "The way you say good when you actually mean fine, whatever." And then he walked away. Webb caught Elena's eye for just a second. There was something apologetic in his expression. She gave him a small, professional smile that communicated exactly nothing, turned back to her console, and got back to work. She did not think about what Donnelly had said for the rest of the morning, or that's what she told herself. The Harlow Industrial Complex had been built in the early 1980s during the county's manufacturing boom. 200,000 square feet of interlocked warehouse and processing space spread across 6 buildings, connected by internal corridors and shared ventilation systems, and the kind of structural design philosophy that made modern fire engineers quietly nervous when they had to walk through it. For 20 years it had processed industrial chemicals. Then it sat vacant for a decade. Then a logistics company had moved in and begun renovating it for warehouse use, which meant that on the afternoon of March the 8th, Building C contained both the original structural vulnerabilities noted in the county report and a brand new collection of partially installed racking systems, stored pallets of packaged goods, and roughly 40,000 liters of commercial solvent that had been logged in the facility manifest under a classification that, it would later be determined, significantly underrepresented its actual flammability rating. Elena did not know this yet. What she knew at 2:17 in the afternoon was that her console was showing an automated fire alarm activation from Building C of the Harlow Industrial Complex, and that Engine 12 was already en route because they had been in the area finishing the tail end of the inspection cycle. She logged it. Confirmed with Engine 12. Dispatched Engine 7 and Ladder 3 as backup per standard protocol for a commercial alarm activation. Noted the time, noted the address. Cross-referenced the structural flag she had placed on the complex that morning. 2:23. Engine 12 on scene. Captain Delgado's voice on the radio, calm and routine. Coordination. Engine 12 on scene at Harlow Industrial, Building C. We've got smoke showing from the northeast corner, visible flame on the second level, requesting additional units. She was already sending them. 2:26. Rescue 2 en route. Engine 9 dispatched as third engine. Battalion Chief Okonkwo notified and en route. 2:29. Delgado again, less calm this time. Coordination, we have rapid fire growth in Building C, possible accelerant involvement. Structure is fully involved on the second level. I have personnel making entry on the ground floor. Elena's hand was already moving across her console. Frequency assignments, unit tracking. She had Building C's floor plan pulled up on her secondary monitor from the county record system, cross-referenced with the structural report. The compromised mezzanine supports were in the northeast corner, where Delgado said the fire started. 2:31. All units on scene, Harlow Industrial Building C, she said into her headset. Be advised, county structural report flags compromised mezzanine support columns in the northeast quadrant of Building C. Repeat, structural vulnerability in the northeast quadrant. Please relay to all personnel making entry. 2:32. Donnelly appeared at her shoulder. She had not heard him approach. You're transmitting structural assessments on an active fire frequency? His voice was not loud. It was controlled, the way a pressure valve is controlled. The structural report flags specific failure points in the area of origin, she said. That's for the incident commander to assess and relay at his discretion. You don't push unsolicited engineering data on an active incident, Vasquez. You give them what they ask for. Battalion Chief Okonkwo hasn't arrived on scene yet. Delgado is the IC. He needs his dispatcher to manage the frequencies, not run tactical operations. She stopped. She had been trained to stop in moments like this, to absorb the correction and continue. She had been told once by a supervisor 2 jobs ago that the thing that would either make her exceptional or get her fired was her difficulty knowing when to defer. She had been practicing deferring for 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days. Understood, she said. Donnelly went back to his desk. She looked at her monitor. She looked at the floor plan of Building C. She looked at the position of the northeast support columns and the trajectory of the reported fire growth. She made one more transmission. Brief, just a notation of record. Engine 12, coordination. Structural flag data has been logged in your incident file if Battalion Chief needs reference on arrival. It was the smallest act of defiance she had allowed herself in 4 years. 2:34. The building came down. Not the whole building, not at once. The northeast mezzanine collapsed first, which was what the county engineer had flagged as the highest probability failure point, and it came down into the ground floor of Building C, where 2 engine crews and a rescue team had been operating. The collapse triggered a secondary ignition in the solvent storage area, which the logistics company had helpfully located in the ground floor northeast corner, and the resulting fireball blew through the internal corridor connecting Building C to Building D, and for approximately 4.5 seconds, every single radio on the scene screamed at once and then went almost entirely silent. Elena had 14 personnel logged as inside Building C at the time of the collapse. 14. She heard the noise on the radio, the sudden explosion of voices, the shout that was cut off. She heard Captain Delgado's voice for exactly 1 second, 3 words, "We have collapse," and then nothing. She heard 2 other voices, unidentified, shouting words she couldn't parse through the distortion, then static. She checked her console. She checked it again. Signal 0, not poor, not degraded, 0. She looked at the repeater status. The primary repeater for the industrial district was mounted on Building D. Building D, which was now on fire. The backup repeater. She had the backup repeater frequencies pre-cleared that morning. She switched to them, transmitted, waited. Nothing. The backup repeater was hardwired through a shared conduit in the Building CD corridor, the corridor that was currently a fireball. She was aware that Donnelly was now standing directly behind her. She was aware that she could hear Director Flores' voice somewhere across the room. She was aware that 3 other dispatchers had stopped what they were doing and were looking at her console. She was aware of all of this the way you are aware of the room around you when you are in the middle of the worst moment of your life and your body has decided that irrelevant information is going to keep arriving anyway. 14 personnel. No comms. She started moving. Not physically, she didn't move from her chair, but something inside her that had been sitting perfectly still for 4 years, 2 months, and 17 days moved, shifted, unfolded, became something other than what she had been performing. "I need a status on the portable repeater units," she said. Her voice was even, completely even. "Do we have any portable units that were staged on the scene?" "Vasquez," Donnelly started. "The portable mesh repeaters, do we have any on the scene inventory list?" She was already pulling up the equipment manifest for the responding units. "You need to wait for the IC." "There is no IC. There is no communications with the scene. There are 14 personnel in a collapsed structure with an active fire and no radio contact." She was still looking at her console. "I need to know if we have portable mesh repeaters on scene, and I need to know it in the next 20 seconds. Silence. Then Marcus Webb from across the room. "Rescue 2 carries a portable mesh kit, standard equipment." Elena pulled up Rescue 2's position on the CAD system. Rescue 2 had been on the north approach, outside the collapse zone. She checked again. Rescue 2's vehicle transponder was active. Rescue 2 was still operational. She switched to the exterior frequency, the one that would reach any units outside the building. "Rescue 2 coordination, respond if you are receiving." Static, 2 seconds. 3. "Coordination, Rescue 2. The voice was firefighter Daniela Reyes. She sounded like she was breathing hard. "We're on the north approach. We have visual on the collapse. We cannot make entry. The access corridor is blocked." "Rescue 2, do you have your portable mesh repeater?" A pause. "Yes." "I need you to deploy it. Maximum range configuration. I need you to deploy it right now and transmit on secondary frequency 9.4. Another pause. Longer this time. "Coordination, that's a non-standard frequency." "Rescue 2, I pre-cleared 9.4 this morning for the industrial complex inspection. It will reach our console. I need you to deploy that repeater, and I need you to do it now." 30 seconds of silence. In those 30 seconds, Elena pulled up the floor plan of Building C again. She mapped the collapse zone against the last known positions of each of the 14 personnel. She identified 3 probable survivor pockets based on the structural report's secondary failure predictions. She was not guessing. She was not estimating. She was reading a structural engineering document and applying it against a real-time scenario with the kind of focused computational speed that she had spent 3 years learning and 4 years pretending she didn't know how to do. "Coordination, Rescue 2, repeater is deployed." Rescue 2, transmitting on 9er 9er.4. Confirm reception. Confirmed. Elena switched frequencies. All personnel inside Harlow Industrial Building C. This is coordination on secondary frequency 9er 9er.4. If you can hear this transmission, acknowledge. Static. 4 seconds. 7. Coordination. The voice was faint, fragmented, but it was there. Male voice, she identified it as Firefighter Torres from Engine 9. We're receiving. We're in the northeast stairwell. We have 5 personnel, 2 injured. Elena's hand was already moving. Torres, do not move. The northeast stairwell shares a load-bearing connection with the compromised mezzanine. Moving in that direction risks secondary collapse. Do you have structural debris blocking the southwest access door? A pause. She could imagine him turning to look. I can't see it. There's smoke. Torres, the southwest access door is 12 meters from your position at bearing 240 degrees. It is in a structurally sound section. There's a marked emergency exit at that door. I need you to move your team to that door. Move low. Move together. Can you do that? Copying. She switched channels. All personnel building C coordination, acknowledge positions. 2 more responses came in across the next 90 seconds. Delgado's voice, hoarse but controlled, with 4 personnel sheltering in the south loading area. Another voice she identified as Firefighter Kim, separated from his crew near the central corridor, disoriented, reporting low visibility. 11 accounted for, 3 missing. She kept her voice even through all of it, perfectly even. The way it had been even 3 years ago, in a different context, under different radio protocols, using different call signs, in a place far away from Harlow County that she had not spoken about since the day she resigned her commission and drove away from the installation for the last time. Donnelly was watching her. He had stopped trying to interrupt approximately 45 seconds into the repeater exchange. He was standing 3 feet from her console, and he was watching her work with an expression that she could feel without looking at it. She had no time to care what it looked like. She had Kim. She was talking him back to awareness, using specific landmarks, the painted column markers, the floor reflector strips, the hose line he should have his hand on. She had Delgado repositioning his group toward the south exit, while avoiding the secondary ignition zone she had plotted based on the accelerant spread dynamics she was extrapolating from the smoke behavior Reyes was describing from outside. She had Torres moving his group through the southwest corridor. She had Director Flores on a secondary console coordinating with the county's mutual aid system to bring in additional apparatus and a structural collapse team from the neighboring district. 12 personnel accounted for, 2 still missing. She had run the numbers on the floor plan 6 times in her head. The 2 missing positions, based on last known locations logged at the time of the collapse, pointed to one zone: the mechanical room in the southeast corner of the building, which was accessible through the south loading area where Delgado's group was currently sheltering. Dahiti, Delgado, she said. Your current position in the south loading bay. There is a mechanical room door in the southeast corner of that bay. Red door marked M1. Do you see it? Static. Then, I see it. I believe you have 2 personnel in that room, possibly injured. The mechanical room has independent structural supports and should be intact. I need you to knock on that door. Silence. She heard, very faintly through the mesh repeater signal, the sound of someone knocking, metal on metal. Then, fainter still, a knocking back. Coordination, Delgado said, and his voice had changed. We have contact, personnel in the mechanical room. The extraction took 19 more minutes. Elena talked Delgado through the safest approach based on the debris field predictions. She coordinated the entry of 2 exterior teams once Reyes and her crew cleared a secondary access path on the north side. She managed 7 simultaneous radio conversations on 3 frequencies, without once losing track of any of the 14 personnel she was responsible for. The last firefighter walked out of Harlow Industrial Building C at 4:22 in the afternoon, covered in soot and concrete dust and carrying someone else's air pack because his own had been destroyed in the collapse. All 14. Walking. The silence in the coordination center afterward was the kind of silence that happens when a room full of professionals realizes that something has just occurred that they do not have immediate language for. Elena logged the incident closure. She updated the CAD records. She noted the frequency assignments and the repeater deployment in the after-action notes, because that information would matter for the debrief, and she wanted it accurate. Her hands were steady. They had been steady the whole time. She was aware that Donnelly had not moved from the spot 3 feet behind her console since approximately 2:38. She did not turn around. She did not need to. It was Director Flores who spoke first. Flores had been working emergency services for 23 years and had the kind of composure that comes from 2 decades of managing chaos. But her voice, when she spoke, was not quite composed. "Elena," she said, "I need you to walk me through what you just did." "I'll have the full after-action documentation completed within the hour," Elena said. "I don't mean the documentation." A pause. "The structural analysis, the frequency pre-clearance, the survivor pocket mapping. Where did that come from?" Elena turned away from her console for the first time in an hour and 45 minutes. She looked at Flores. Then, because she was not going to pretend she didn't know he was there, she looked at Donnelly. Donnelly looked like a man who was standing in the wreckage of an assumption he had made about the world, and discovering that the assumption had been load-bearing. She took a breath. "Prior to my position here," she said, "I served for 6 years as a combat search and rescue coordinator with the United States Army. I was attached to a special operations support element. My primary function was managing multi-team extractions from active hostile environments using degraded communications infrastructure." She paused. "I have coordinated the extraction of personnel from compromised structures on 7 separate occasions. 3 of those involved total comms blackout. The methodology I use today is standard doctrine for those scenarios." Nobody in the room said anything. "I left military service after an incident in my final deployment," she said. "A coordination failure, not mine, systemic, 7 personnel lost." She said it quietly. Not for effect. "Understood communications work. And because I understood communications work, and because I thought I could do it from a place that was..." She stopped. Found the word. "Smaller. I was trying to operate at a reduced scale." She looked at Donnelly again. "I understand why the assessment was what it was," she said. "I was performing below my capability, deliberately. I didn't want to be responsible for outcomes at that level again." A pause. "Today I didn't have that option." The silence continued for another 3 seconds. Then Donnelly said something that she had not expected him to say. He said, "I owe you an apology." He said it the way people say things they mean but have to work to get out. Slowly. Precisely. "The structural transmission you made at 2:31. I overrode you. I was wrong to do that. If you had not pre-cleared those backup frequencies this morning, if you had not already flagged that structural report..." He stopped. 14 people are alive because of your preparation and your response today. I want to say that clearly. And I want to say that I've been operating with an incomplete understanding of your capabilities since you joined this unit. That is a failure of my assessment, and I take responsibility for it." Elena looked at him for a moment. "Thank you," she said, not warmly, not coldly, just directly, because it was what the moment required. The debrief took 4 hours. The after-action report took 3 days. Battalion Chief Okonkwo, who had arrived on scene minutes after the collapse and had spent the entire incident working the exterior operation, submitted a formal commendation to the State Fire Marshal's office. It cited Elena Vasquez by name and described the communications management during the incident as exhibiting, in Okonkwo's phrasing, a level of tactical proficiency that exceeded the defined scope of the dispatch coordinator role and directly accounted for the successful extraction of all 14 personnel. Captain Delgado, when he was interviewed for the report, was asked what moment he believed had been most critical to his crew's survival. He said, without hesitation, that it was when the radio came back. He said that the voice on the frequency had been calm. He said that calm mattered enormously in that kind of darkness, that when your visibility is 0 and your instinct is panic and your training is fighting your fear, a calm voice that knows exactly where you are and exactly where you need to go is the difference between coherent action and collapse. He said he had asked afterward who the coordinator was on that frequency. He said he had not been surprised to learn it was Elena. He had met her once before at a routine training day. He said she had the eyes of someone who had seen too much and was being very careful about it. He said he had wondered about her then. He said he was glad the situation had not required him to wonder anymore. 6 weeks after the incident, Director Flores offered Elena a new role. It had a long title that included the words Communications Tactics and Incident Integration, and it came with a salary increase and a seat at the table during multi-agency incident planning sessions. It also came, implicitly, with the expectation that she would stop operating at reduced scale. She accepted. She did not accept because Donnelly apologized, though that mattered. She did not accept because of the commendation, though she kept a copy of it in the same folder on her personal drive as the review that had called her instincts insufficient. She accepted because of something that had happened in the mechanical room. When the 2 missing firefighters came out, one of them, a 24-year-old named firefighter Priya Shah, had a fractured wrist from the collapsed debris. She was otherwise uninjured. When she was walked out of the building by Delgado's crew and past the staging area where the exterior teams were waiting, she was still wearing her mask, and she was shaking slightly from adrenaline, and the first thing she said when she got clear of the structure, before she would let the medics look at her, was, "Who is the voice?" one of the exterior crew told her. Shah looked across the staging area. She found Elena, who was still at her mobile console in the command vehicle, still working, still managing the frequency assignments and the unit traffic even as the incident was winding down. Shah, with a fractured wrist and concrete dust in her hair, raised her good hand. She waved. Elena saw it. Elena. She had been doing the math on March the 8th for years before it happened. Not that specific day, but that specific weight. The calculus of outcomes, the question of whether the thing that had broken in her on her last deployment was also the thing that made her most capable of preventing it from happening to someone else. She had been trying to solve for that equation since the day she drove away from the installation. She had been trying to determine whether the answer was that she should use what she knew or that she should protect others from ever needing it. Priya Shah, 24 years old, with a fractured wrist, waving from across a parking lot full of fire apparatus and ambulances and the remains of a building. That was the answer. 8 months later, Harlow County Emergency Services implemented a new protocol. It required all dispatch supervisors to complete a 40-hour course in tactical communications management. The course had been developed by Elena Vasquez, working in collaboration with 2 military search and rescue specialists and a structural engineering consultant from the State Fire Marshal's office. It incorporated the techniques she had used on March the 8th as core curriculum. It included, in the introductory materials, a section on the pre-clearance of backup frequency channels during complex multi-unit inspections of structurally compromised structures. The county fire marshal endorsed the protocol. 3 neighboring counties adopted it within the first year. Donnelly, at the first training cohort, sat in the front row. He did not arrive late. There is something that this story asks us to consider, and it is not a comfortable question. How many times do we place a ceiling on someone without checking whether the ceiling is real? How many times do we read competence as compliance and absence of drama as absence of ability? Elena Vasquez was in that building, metaphorically speaking, for 4 years before the building gave her a reason to be who she actually was. And for 4 years, the institution around her wrote it into documents that she was sufficient but not exceptional, adequate but not instinctive, skilled but not strategic. She had led military extractions. She had kept people alive under enemy fire on degraded frequencies in hostile terrain. She had done it 6 times before the 7th time broke her heart and sent her looking for a smaller life. And the institution looked at her and saw a dispatcher who was pretty good at managing routine traffic. There is a lesson in this story that goes beyond emergency services and beyond professional vindication. It is about what we decide we know about people when we have only seen them in the conditions we have made available to them. Elena performed at the level she was permitted to perform. She operated within the role she was assigned. People who have walked through fire are often the most qualified to guide others through it, not despite what they've survived, because of it. The fracture points in their histories are not disqualifications. They are exactly the places where the knowledge lives, where the instinct was forged, where the calm voice in the darkness was built, moment by moment, loss by loss, until it became the thing that could hold 14 people steady while the world collapsed around them. Do not write people off because they are not performing at full capacity. You do not always know what full capacity looks like. You do not always know what someone has already survived to get to the room where you are meeting them. You do not always know what they are carrying that makes ordinary function look like restraint. Priya Shah waved from across a parking lot and went home to her family. 14 times. That is what we sometimes owe to the people we decided not to see clearly. If this story stayed with you, and we hope it did, please take a second to hit that subscribe button. We tell stories like this one every week. Stories about the people inside the emergencies, the ones whose names don't always make the headlines, but whose decisions make the difference. You are already the kind of person who wants to know those stories, or you wouldn't have made it this far. Stay with us. And in the comments, we want to hear from you. Have you ever been underestimated in a moment that mattered? Or have you ever been the one who misjudged someone and had to revise everything you thought you knew? Tell us. Those conversations are as important as the stories themselves. Share this one with someone who needs to hear it. There is somebody in your life who is operating at reduced scale right now. Maybe they need to know that their history is not a liability. Maybe they need to hear that the fire they survived is exactly what makes them capable. Send it to them. That is how these stories do what they are supposed to do. We will see you in the next one.